Let's get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Karina Hakopchikian, Vice President of the USC Gold Alumni Association. I am delighted to welcome you all to Planning Your Next Step, Retirement as a New Life Stage. This is our first collaboration between the Alumni Association and the USC Emeriti Center. And we're pleased to welcome guests from the entire Trojan family. Tonight's program was designed to help us think differently about retirement, what's important to us, and some of the issues that we may need to consider in achieving our goals. Our guide is best-selling author, columnist, and retirement expert Helen Dennis. She's written and presented extensively on the new retirement. Also, you should know that Helen spent 20 years at USC. She launched her career in the School of Gerontology, and we are pleased to have her with us. Excuse me. Before we get started, I'd like to remind all of our guests that we will have time for a Q&A at the end of the program. We invite all of you to post your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. And without further ado, Helen.
Well, thank you, Corinne, and hello, everyone. It's great to see everyone here and also some longtime friends. It's nice to see Art Bartner and Betty Redmond and many others. Great to see you. It's a treat, really. So a couple of comments before I get started. I appreciate all the comments you wrote on what you were interested in this topic. I figured if I put all of your comments together, we would have a semester course. They are very broad, very deep, and very relevant. So instead, I'm going to try to capture some of the highlights, okay? The other piece is my presentation is not going to deal with finances. I'm going to deal with all those things that don't add up on a spreadsheet. Sometimes those issues can be more complex than the financial ones on a spreadsheet. So with that, we can have our first slide. And now we can have our second slide. So I'd like to begin with a story. And this is about a story about a wealthy widow from a very prominent family in Pasadena. And she wanted to leave a legacy to pass on to her children. So she decided to have a family history written, and she hired a very renowned professor. We're not sure whether that professor is from USC or UCLA. That is not clear yet. Well, the professor conducted extensive interviews, completed in-depth research, and came upon some very disturbing information. You see, the widow's grandfather died in the electric chair in San Quentin. Well, the widow was horrified, and begged the professor to please omit this from the family history. Well, initially the professor refused, and that he was committed to truth and integrity. Well, after the widow again pleaded, the professor finally agreed to present the facts as positively as possible. And he wrote the following. Her maternal grandfather occupied the chair of applied electricity at one of the West Coast's best known institutions. He was extremely attached to his position and literally died in harness. Slide. Next. So there are a lot of ways to tell a story. I'd like to tell a story a little differently, hopefully without twisting it to just sound good, which takes us to our agenda. I'd like to cover three things with you together. First is the trends. What's new? What is the environment that we're operating in? The second, I want to cover something called retirement readiness. How do we know when we're ready? And the third, to offer what I would call a few tips for success. Next. But before we get to that piece, let's just do a little bit of background. And this is review for many of you. We know the population is aging, particularly the 65 plus. And if we look at 2020, we'll see that about 15% of the US population is 65 and over, which means about 1 out of 7 people. That means you go down an average street an average day, 1 out of 7. But what demographers and gerontologists like to look at is 2030, and this is when the youngest baby boomer will turn 65. If you look at that percentage, that's 19%, that's almost 1 out of 5. And if you've ever been to Florida, you're going to get kind of a scheme, a picture of what that looks like. Not every town is going to look like that, but there's going to be more people, more retirement residents, more hospitals, more banks, more recreational centers. So demographers like to look at Florida as really the time of the future. Next. So let's talk about life expectancy for a moment. So this is considered transformational. In 100 years, we've gained about 30 years of life expectancy. And I'd like to give us all a pat on the back for that. However, due to the pandemic, a study just came out between Princeton and the Davis School of Gerontology that found for the second time, in the second year, our life expectancies actually decreased. It's down 1.13 years as a whole. For the Hispanic population, life expectancy is decreasing 3.05 years. For African Americans, 2.1, and for Caucasians, 0.6. So you can see the disparity, and that's very much reflected in the COVID epidemic. But over the past 100 years, we've done well. And again, this is called the longevity revolution. Next. So I want to talk about retirement in a different way. And I like to think about the old retirement as 1.0 and the new one 2.0. Next. And here's part of the 2.0 story. At one time, retirement was considered a period of leisure. Now you would sit in your beach chair, prop your feet up, read the newspaper, and that would be part of your retirement. Well, I want to suggest after a few months, this seat's going to get very uncomfortable. That newspaper will probably get a little boring, and you might be asking, so what is going to happen next? Next slide. So this is what people are doing. Folks look at retirement, and this is a reality, as a period for most. It's a period of freedom. I finally can do all the things I love to do. I'm with my grandkids, I grow a garden, I travel, I paint, I play golf, I go swimming, I watch the sunset. And there are millions and millions of people for whom this picture of retirement is perfect. But there is a growing number that's saying, okay, this is great, but I have now 25 to 30 years of life ahead of me. What else is there? Next slide. And this is where our trends come in. So our first trend is we are living in a new life stage. This is Mary Catherine Bateson, who actually passed away just a couple of months ago. She is the daughter of, I blocked on her name, but Mary Catherine, of Margaret Mead. She's a daughter of Margaret Mead. So Mary Catherine Bateson acknowledged we've really chronologically added years to the end of life. But we've also, as she writes, we have added 20 years, added not to the end of life, but to the middle of life. Next slide. And it's really a time of new opportunity. Mark Friedman, who heads up something called encore.org and wrote a book called The Big Shift, he said that's the time between the middle years and what we call old age. That could maybe between 60 and 85. And he writes, this is an unstable space. It has no name, no clear beginning, no end, no rites or routes of passage. It faces a contradictory culture, incoherent policies, and a society that seems in denial that this period ever existed. Next slide. So it is so new that your gerontologists, sociologists, anthropologists, demographers can't decide what to call it. So here are the names that have been used for this new life stage. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who is a Harvard sociologist, calls it the third age. Eric Erickson calls it generativity. Mark Friedman calls it the encore years. Laura Carstensen, who heads up the Stanford Longevity Center, calls it Act 4. I have colleagues at Boston College that say, this is so new, we're calling it the X revolution. And if you drop down a bit, to the left, the bonus years, Abigail Trafford used to work for the Washington Post. She said, this new time, it's bonus years. And my colleague and I made up a word. We called it renewment, a cross between retirement and renewal. So it is a new time. Next. That takes us to slide number 2 and our next trend. And that is, we older adults, midlife and older adults, are considered the new social capital, meaning we have something to contribute. Now, encore.org is a think tank in Northern California, and they have launched and propelled and disseminated this concept of an encore career. They call it second acts for the greater good. So an encore career embraces purpose, a passion, sometimes a paycheck, but what is most important, it's giving back. Next slide. So I want to tell you the story about CATALINO TAPIA. So a period of time that encore.org gave out a purpose prize for people 60 and over who did something that helped solve a social problem that had a profound impact on society. And they gave a financial reward. This was one example. So CATALINO comes from Mexico. He has $9 in his pocket, and he opens up a gardener's business in San Francisco. He manages to send his son to Bolt Law School. And at graduation, he says to himself, why can't other low-income Latino families provide a good education for their kids? So he goes to his gardeners. He said, I'm starting a foundation. I want you to contribute. I want your clients to contribute. So in a period of 2 years, he raises $250,000. He provides scholarships for 17 students who in turn do community service, and CATALINO won $100,000 as a purpose prize. But purpose prizes also were sent to businessmen, to physicians. It was not only individuals from low income, but it was a message that older adults have something to contribute, and encore.org rewarded them not only with remuneration, but with recognition. Next slide. So encore.org has launched something else. It's called Generation to Generation, and with a very ambitious initiative. The initiative is to mobilize 1 million adults over 50 to help young people thrive and unite all ages to create a better future. And Mark also wrote a book recently, How to Live Forever. And I thought, well, this is going to be the magic answer. I assume we're going to hear about nutrition and exercise and stress management. Not at all. It's all about the generations. And Mark's position is we have done so much in our society to separate the generations in education and housing. And he says, to live forever, we have to connect the generations. Okay, next. There is support for people to move into the encore transition. And here are a few examples. One is the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative that unleashes the potential of very experienced leaders to help solve society's most pressing challenges. It's a 3-day on-campus program. It's a 1-year program. And I want to tell you about a person who went through it. The name may be familiar. You may know the name Paul Irving, particularly among our legal colleagues. Paul Irving is an attorney. He was with a very prestigious firm in Los Angeles. Mid to later life, Paul decides, I need to do something different. So he attends the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative for 1 year, comes back to Los Angeles, and he launches the Milken Institute Future of Aging. Plus, he is also a scholar in residence at the Davis School. But to go to the Harvard program, you have to come with a project in mind. So Stanford has a program it's called the Distinguished Career Institute, helps individuals in midlife to help them renew their purpose and build new communities. University of Minnesota has an advanced career program. The Encore Connecticut program is at the University of Connecticut. They are embedded in the School of Public Policy. They take individuals from the private and public sector, put them through an educational program, and then they move into nonprofit work, bringing their new skills and their private sector skills. I have a colleague at the Union Theological Seminary who teaches a course on social purpose and what that might look like in mid to later adulthood. So the message to me from all of these institutions is that people not only in young life and midlife, but older age, one, teachable, trainable, a valuable resource, and a resource investing in who ultimately will give back. I find that very encouraging. So next slide. So the next trend is that work is part of retirement. So traditionally, the model of work and retirement is that they are two distinct entities. You work, okay, and you retire. Not the case today. Today, work is an integral part of the retirement experience. It's not a contradiction. So there are a lot of roles you can play in the area of work. You can become an employee, part-time, full-time, do something you've never done, do something that's new. You can try entrepreneurship. The Kauffman Foundation focuses on entrepreneurship and does a lot of studies. They recently found out that 25% of new entrepreneurs were between 55 and 64. And that's up about 15% from 1996. And they also found that older entrepreneurs are rather consistently more successful. They have more experience, and that really shows at the end. You could become a consultant, pursue an encore career, and here's a new term, folks. It's called a men-turn, brand new. You may have seen the film The Intern with Robert De Niro, okay? He had an internship and what we would call a men-turnship. This comes from Airbnb. Here's the backstory. Airbnb was selling hospitality in 2013, but they didn't know how to sell it. So at the same time, Chip Conley, who owned a company called Joie de Vivre, was a hospitality company that managed 15 boutique hotels. And Airbnb said, Chip, we want you to come on board. You know this business, we don't. So Conley says, I'd like to. I know nothing about this digital space. Airbnb said, don't worry, we will teach you, you'll learn. He became a mentor. And what Chip Conley did, aside from writing a book, he launched something called the Modern Elder Academy, which is in Mexico. And it helps midlife people transition to later life with greater intention, purpose, and passion. So I don't know what you would call a woman who is this. Maybe this is a woman turn. I think there's room for new vocabulary, but that is the term that Chip Conley came up with. It is a men term. So next slide. So the fourth trend I want to talk about is community and the importance of community, particularly during this pandemic time. I'm going to talk about one in particular that's called the village. So the village is, we know that according to AARP, about 90% of people want to age in place, meaning they want to stay in their home, their condo, their apartment as long as possible. So given that, we have a movement that evolved out of Beacon Village in Boston. So what is the village? The village is a grassroots membership organization that allows and helps individuals age in place while stay connected to their community. And people who belong to a village have at least two roles they can play. They can either contribute or receive services. Next slide. And you can say, well, what kind of services are we talking about? Well, it can be as simple as fixing a garden hose, driving, very important in Southern California, changing a light bulb, a well visit. It could be any of these services, but you could contribute the service and you could also receive the service, okay? There is a fee. I think for 1 year on average, maybe it's $975 for a family, $675 in general for a single household. There are about 300 villages throughout the nation. There are 60 just in the state of California. I'm a cheerleader for the village. This is building a natural community. It's almost going back to the 50s when people knew their neighbors, where Mrs. Jones needed a ride to the doctor or her bridge game or to the gym. There was someone there to take her. Or if Mrs. Smith wasn't feeling well, someone would check in on her. But we don't have many of those communities. So what the village does is really take a geographic area and develop this. It's a nonprofit organization. As I say, if I can't empty my trash cans or change a light bulb, I shouldn't have to go into assisted living. So these small tasks make such a difference. Plus, as a volunteer, people feel they make a difference. And I'm going to tell a brief story on that middle slide. There was actually an engineer, a woman 94 years old needed the light bulb changed. Now we think it's nothing, but she was in the dark. The man comes to the door, gets a ladder, changes the light bulb, he leaves, and the woman has tears down her eyes. How important this was, this simple task, just to change a light bulb. And it made the man who changed the light bulb in a period of 15 minutes do a task that really helped someone. So there's lots of good things. One other piece to this is there's a lot of social and cultural activities. I belong to the Palos Verdes Village, and we have book groups, we have dine rounds, we have debates, we have a vodka tasting party, we have hiking groups. And there's a saying, if you've seen one village, you've seen one village. It reflects your particular community. And there will be a reference list on the Emeriti website. If you're interested, if there's one in your community, you go to Village Network, and that URL will be on the website. Okay, next. And I think this sums it up. To give, to receive, to live passionately and mindfully, independently, and in community, that's the San Francisco Village. Next. I want to talk about another village. And this is Renewment, a cross between retirement and renewal. What is it? It's a forum for career women. By career women, I mean for women for whom work is very important, more than a paycheck, has great meaning. For career women to make the transition from work to retirement and create the next chapter of their lives to be equally, if not more rewarding than the previous chapters. A little backstory, this started in 1999 with a colleague, Bernice Bratter. And it came about because there were no retirement models for career women. Most of the retirement models were male models, and they were based on finance. So we launched this 20 years ago with no intention of expanding. A group of women on the West Side, we had these structured discussions about transition and change. And another group said, you know, I'm interested in this. Could you help us? Well, yeah, we'll help you start another. Well, as it turned out, this has grown virally across the country. 35 to 40 renewment groups are meeting. Well, enter the pandemic. These women can't meet anymore, right? No face-to-face. So my colleague and I said, well, let's try something different. Let's launch what we call roundtables. And we'll open it up to, the first 15 people who will join us around a roundtable to talk about transition and change. Well, again, this has mushroomed. There were waiting lists. We've just launched our 8th roundtable. And I want to add, if any of the women who are tuned in have any interest in this, again, there'll be an opportunity to RSVP from a communication you'll receive from the Emeriti Center. Next slide. So you may wonder, so what do we talk about? Well, on the transition from work to retirement, we'd say, well, it's that decision. How do you know when it's right? Or maybe we talk about identity, such as, well, who am I without my business card? Or maybe the question of what happens if he retires first? Or what happens if she retires first? These are questions from work to retirement, but as people have been in this for 20 years, and many of them meeting for 15 years, 18 years, building these enduring communities of women, we found that it's a platform not only for work to retirement, but it's a platform that provides support for transition and change for career women throughout their lifetime. As in, there's no graduation, because transition and change is what life is about. So that is our renewment story. Next slide. And you can ask, what about the men? Don't the men count in this picture? And the answer is absolutely. And I now take the risk of being slightly sexist. So in working with 20,000 employees in an educational settings on non-financial issues, my observation is that men go about this differently. There are exceptions to this, but there are many men who don't talk about these issues very readily, and sometimes not at all. Where women, again, perhaps biased, seem to gets to these issues quite readily. So this is the Life Transition Group. This was launched about 10 years ago by 2 very senior advertising executives. In fact, one of the co-founders, Brian Harris, was on the faculty of the business school. They have about 3 groups running now. We call them our sibling organization. And they talk about, they're far more organized, far more structured. They know their program a year in advance. And what this picture is about, every year, 8 of our women and 8 of their men get together and have a discussion. And the reason it's 16, that's the number of seats around a very large conference table. And we talk about a topic. And it is, I would say it's a love fest. They think we're fabulous. We think they are terrific. So we are invited once a year to be their guests. Next. So the last trend I want to talk about is technology, and technology is our friend. Next. It's not unusual to have 2 women sitting on the sofa having tea saying, older women, it's been a typical day. I Skyped the grandkids, Twittered a new recipe, and I Facebooked my daughter. Next. Technology continues to be a very significant part of our life and has also come up with some innovations which has improved life. And I want to give you 3 examples. One is a Liftware spoon. This is for people who have a tremor from either Parkinson's or essential tremor. And the gadget you see on the end stabilizes the spoon. That means a person with Parkinson's can go out to lunch with a friend, order a bowl of soup, and bring that spoon to his or her mouth without a tremor, without spilling. So what does this say? That means that individual maintains dignity, maintains functionality, and does not have to be self-aware and be an equal participant without any discomfort. That also attaches to a fork, and it is part of a Liftware series. Next. This is another good innovation. This is called TrueLink. And TrueLink is for individuals with mild cognitive impairment. And it is a Visa card. It's actually accepted wherever Visa is accepted, and it is programmed. And it is programmed to limit a withdrawal or a charge. That means an individual can go to an ATM machine and withdraw up to a limited amount. That individual can go to a merchant and make a purchase and use this TrueLink card, which is again programmed up for a certain amount. So what does this do for the individual? It allows the individual to participate as an equal member, to do things what people typically do, to be functional, to retain dignity. Next. And this last one you may be acquainted with is GoGo Grandparent. This is for individuals who do not have a smartphone. What they do is they call this number, they get an operator, the operator connects the individual to Lyft or Uber and arranges for a ride. And typically the driver is instructed to take a little bit more time. Often the vehicle is larger, that may accommodate a walker and some canes. So this is GoGo Grandparent. Next. So this now gets to something called retirement readiness. So this is a form that asks you 14 questions. Now it's not the magic form that you should, one, be expected to know all these 14 questions. And I think we're going to put those questions up in just a moment. But it asks you, what do you know? So instead of giving you pencil and paper that makes you feel like you're at school, and are we bringing this up? We are indeed.
Yes.
This is called a pregnant pause. We are getting there. So I'm going to ask you to do something a little different in answering these questions. First, don't spend too much time on any question, okay? It's a quick yes or no. And we got 10 fingers. We got 14 questions. So instead of racing to get a pencil and paper, I'm going to ask you to just count on your fingers every time you have a yes. So my dear colleagues, tell me where we are on getting up this form.
It's up on my screen, so you're not seeing it on your end?
No, maybe go to the next. I don't see it. Maybe go, so Perhaps maybe one of our participants can tell us if the questions are up.
No, they're not up.
Oh, but they are coming. No, they are not coming yet. So if they are not coming, we have another way to do this. We'll give it another, 20 seconds, and we'll see if we get them up.
Helen, I was going to say the
So I have to say, one of the characteristics of our life stage, dear friends, is flexibility and adaptability. So what we all are practicing at this moment is flexibility and adaptability. So colleagues, what do you suggest? Shall we just go ahead and?
going to say that there's the first link that's in the chat box is the link to the retirement readiness form. It's a
So
PDF.
they have to go, wait a minute, we have to go to the chat box?
My apologies, because it's up on my screen, but I guess it stops sharing every
Okay.
time I open.
All right, so, okay, everyone, let's see how we're going to do this.
Not in the chat box.
Is it in the chat box?
Are you seeing?
There we go.
Okay, everyone, so here we go. Here are instructions. Again, we're in school, okay? Go to the chat box and you will see retirement readiness PDF. Give that a click and we're going to run through it. Oh, excellent. Perfect. So now I have to just check and I've lost, oh my goodness.
Helen, you want to read them off?
I'm trying to relaunch the meeting. I'm trying to get back in.
You're in.
I have nothing on my screen.
Oh, okay. All right, well.
I wonder if you can resend me. I think I can't enter because I think it's closed.
Okay, Nija, can you help Helen? Because we can still see you, Helen.
I still see her on my end as well.
We can see you, but you can't see us. Is that the situation?
I don't know if I'm allowed to get in again because I think it's closed.
Well, you're in if you'll click on the Zoom icon. You probably will have more than one thing open. You can then click on the meeting one.
Oh dear, this is really,
Helen, what you could do is just leave the meeting and then rejoin us.
yes, can you send me the Zoom? I'm
Yes.
here launching meeting and I don't get on. So-
Just exit the meeting. And then log back
Actually,
in.
maybe just the little blue icon probably at the bottom of your screen, the little blue icon with the white camera in it, just click that.
This is really,
Do you see something that says back to meeting or back to, I think it says back to meeting with a like curved arrow?
I actually lost the, I've lost the whole picture.
We can hear you though. And we can see the retirement readiness poll questions.
Helen, I re-emailed the link if you want to start fresh and
Okay,
exit and rejoin.
can you did you email for at AOL?
It was just.
I sent it to,
Or to Gmail?
Gmail, Helen
Okay,
Dennis Gmail.
I'll be right on with you.
Okay. Well, these are the things that sometimes happen, so we're grateful. Hopefully this is providing everybody with a prompt to consider some of these issues as we are.
Okay,
Many of us-
here we go. One more, I'm going to allow, here we go.
Did everyone get a chance to see the retirement readiness list and have an idea of how many yeses you have?
Yes.
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 Okay, so we can launch the poll. And if you could click on how many yeses that you got.
You don't have 13.
So
So do I round up?
so
I guess I'll do that.
Go ahead.
okay, so actually I have the poll, but I do not have a picture of anything else. So here's the story. Did we get the results of the poll?
So right now, people are still taking the poll. They've got 60 seconds. So right now we have 64% have voted. And it looks like it's slightly growing. Right now, Helen, we've got 27% have 5, 41%. Oh, now we have 28% 5, 41% 10, 20% 12, and 11% have 14.
Okay, well, this is pretty good. I would say anyone who got between 12 and 14, you actually can join me next time when we have a seminar like this. So dear colleagues, I do have the poll. I do not have the visual. So I just need a little support here, what I should be doing. It says, do you want to allow this open? I say allow, launch meeting. And you said the little blue icon, maybe that's something that'll happen. No, the blue icon is typing a message.
So Helen, can you see us?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay. And did you?
So
We can see you. So it just continue to go
you know
with
what
your.
we'll do? I have, I will put up my slides. How about if we do that? So I can go along and see where you are. And so we are now.
We're now at the polling questions, the retirement readiness, and
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I have my slides up so I can go along with you. You can't see me, folks. I can't see you, but I'm here. So what I want to do to go to the slide that says, are you ready for retirement? What do you know? So that's the slide we should be on, dear colleague. Okay.
there you go.
Okay, so what I want to do is just make a comment about each one of these. What I've done is those 14 aren't the magic 14, but it's asking, what do you know? So I pulled out the ones that don't deal with finance, and just to make a comment about each one. So the first one, adjustments you and your partner need to make. Well, first of all, to acknowledge not everyone retires with a partner, but if you do, that requires a discussion. It means, how much time do we spend together? How much time do we spend apart? Who does what in the house? Who does grocery shopping? What tasks do we split up, if any? So that's one thing. What do you know?
Oh no, Helen, you're muted.
Helen, my mistake.
Yeah, okay, this is all right. This is okay. Let's go to number 5. Type of housing to buy or rent. Again, what information do you need? And 6 is such a big one, what to do with time. How to create fun in the future. For some, that's not an issue. But for some, if you've been working 80 hours a week and have done nothing but either your litigation, your teaching, your research, this may be a question. How do you just have a good time? 9, what do you need to know if you want to relocate, and particularly employment, part-time? Ask your question, are you ready to work for a job that you love, but it may be less profitable? And again, how to increase health and vigor. This is one where we often know the answers, but it's very hard to implement. And the last, how to prevent being lonely or depressed. And that really is so important during this pandemic. So let's move to the next slide, which is work as a planning tool. So this life stage often requires some reflection. So how do you know what you really want to do? Well, I've asked this question, what do you love about your work? To, I said, many thousands of people. And these are the characteristics that people say, this is really what's kept me working at my employer. I just love what I do. I love the students. I love the teaching. I love the briefs. I love being in court. I love the research. What people love and often miss most are colleagues and friends. Some people love the structure and think maybe they'll miss it. Some just love the challenge. Certainly the opportunity to learn, which is so just implicit and inherent in a university setting. Some just say, what's important to me is to have impact. Or others say, prestige and influence. I like to make things happen. And of course, the students are always of most importance, particularly in the academic setting. And a research project I did with the Emeriti Center, what was so clear, that the students were not only important to faculty and staff, but students were important to the people who support the facility. These are the electricians, these are the plumbers. And we asked them, what will you miss most? They missed the students. And of course, then recognition, some love the physical environment. So one way to look at this is to say, what do I love about my work? And what will I miss when I leave it? And what can I do in this next chapter that will substitute for it? Next. So there's another way to be, shall we say, a little more reflective. And that is to look at something called drivers. Now, this is taken from a book by Rick Miners and Jerry Sedler. They wrote a book called Don't Retire, Rewire. And they say, a driver is your personal motivator. It's part of your soul. It's part of your ego. It's part of your spirit. It's part of your heart. It's what makes you do things you do. And they came up with 30 drivers. And this is just a partial list. I likely will put all 30 on the Emeriti website because it's a way to think about doing something that you love to do. Do you love to solve problems? Do you love just the competition? Do you love having new experiences? So it helps one focus on the kinds of activities and the kinds of engagement for that next chapter. Next. So that takes us now to a few tips. What are a few tips for this next chapter? One is I want to suggest to retire well, you have to try to age well. This is a study and a project that was done a number of years ago by John Rowe and Robert Kahn. And a lot of the research in aging is on the declining process. Why do cells die? Why do cells die? Why do we lose function? So what the researchers said, well, we'd like to ask a different question, which is, what can we learn from people who do it well? And they found there were three components. One was to avoid disease and disability. And you can say, you wake up one morning to avoid disease and disability? Not at all. They were talking about risk factors, which are smoking, obesity, lack of exercise, stress. These are people who, and these were about 1,000 people they followed for 8 years. They had high cognitive and physical functioning, meaning they were intellectually engaged, they were physically active. And the third component was they were engaged with life. And by that, they meant they were involved in reciprocal activities as well as meaningful ones. Next. So that's tip number one, age well. So tip number two, be bold and open. Try something new. This is the time. What are we waiting for? So what are the new things you could try? Well, maybe it's employment or an encore career. Maybe it's an encore fellowship, which is offered by encore.org. This takes folks from the private sector, puts them into a position at a nonprofit organization. It's 6 months of work, pays a $25,000 stipend, and that is through encore.org, and you become a fellow, become an entrepreneur, teach or tutor. There's something called the Experience Corps that is sponsored by AARP, where they have individuals in mid to later life who tutor children grades 1 through 3 for financial literacy. And then there is volunteering. And this is also very tricky because there are questions we need to ask ourselves. Will you volunteer for something you usually get paid for, and now you're going to volunteer? Are you going to, is there a way you can sell yourself to a volunteer to say, this is what's important to me, this is what I can contribute, or pursue a new hobby or new leisure activities? And one thing you can do in exploring this area is shadow someone. This is not only for people finding a new job, but if there's someone who has an activity and engagement in mid to later life you think is pretty cool, you think you'd like to do it, say, you know, can I spend a day with you? Or the other thing you can do is interview, do a volunteer interview, sit down with someone and say, tell me a little bit about what you're doing, particularly if it's someone in a volunteer position that you really like. So let's go to the next slide. So the third pointer to have a really wonderful, extraordinary retirement experience is stay connected. So we may not look like this today, but the message is stay connected to family and friends. We know that social isolation in this country is of epidemic proportion among older adults and also among younger people. And that means taking the initiative. That means Zoom, telephone calls, when we are allowed to visit face-to-face, get together. So stay connected, be part of a community. It becomes, we know how important that is now during the pandemic, and certainly in later life, it even becomes more important. Next. And then point number 4 is never act your age. So what messages can we learn from celebrities? Well, this is Angela Lansbury at the age of 95. She says, I've never been particularly aware of my age, but she says, age is like being on a bicycle. I just put my foot down and keep going. Next slide. And then there's Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. So Carl Reiner passed away this past year. He was 98. And I should add, these are people who continue to work, and there's a message in that. So his quote was, every morning I pick up my newspaper, get the obit section, and if I'm not listed, I eat my breakfast. Well, that was also the title of a wonderful HBO special where we had outrageous Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Norman Lear, all of these men working in later life and contributing. The week before Carl Reiner died, he is quoted as saying, I've always got something I'm doing and improving. There might be a message in that. Next. And then there's the hilarious Betty White, who just celebrated her 99th birthday. She considers herself an expert on sleep. She says, get at least 8 hours of beauty sleep and, well, 9 if you're actually ugly. A very funny lady. And then we have, next slide, we have Dick Van Dyke. So his advice is sing and dance every day of your life. And if any of you seen the latest Mary Poppins film, he truly jumped up on this desk, did a tap dance, jumped off that desk with a great spring, and advises, if you can, sing and dance every day of your life. And next slide. Next slide, we have Dr. Ruth, a sex therapist and also a Holocaust survivor. And Dr. Ruth says one way that she has coped with anxiety and stress, she looks for happiness. And her quote is, I look for things to smile about. So I think these celebs have given us some pretty good advice. So what I'm suggesting is that we are in an encore time. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of possibilities. And there really aren't any borders on the page. But what it requires of many of us is to have a new view, a new outlook of retirement, to know we are valued in our society, and that we often have to take the initiative to make something happen. It's unlikely that it'll come to us. Next slide. And so what's the message after all this? Well, I'm saying embrace this new life stage. This is a time of opportunity. The second message is age well. Age well. That means aging well in terms of your health, your fitness, your relationships. We have, I think, a responsibility to take care of ourselves. And we have the knowledge, we have the information on how to do it. The third is be bold. Try something new, take a risk. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it. The third is stay connected. Connection is so important. And my recommendation is stay connected and be part of a community. Feel that you count in some arena that maybe is no longer a work site. The fourth, laughed a lot. Our comedians certainly gave us a strong message. And finally, never act your age. Next slide. So I like to end with that famous philosopher, Charles Schulz, who said, you know, life is a 10-speed bicycle. Most of us have gears we never use. So what my hope is for each of us, that we can find the gears we need to create this next chapter of life that is one of meaning, purpose, fulfillment, being with people whom we love, and of course, always having an opportunity to give back. And our final slide is within the USC family and culture is to fight on, and for each of us to fight on for a new great life stage that is full of possibilities and opportunities.